I started preparing this paper when I was at a research retreat in Barcelona this July. I was a bit more than halfway through the retreat when I realized how the effective tenor of the retreat changed, and I found myself feeling sad that it would all come to an end soon. I enjoyed the warmth, the pleasure of the sun, the lack of emails. I enjoyed the writing processes and the fact that I'd managed to leave Copenhagen and to carve out time of a calendar which often seemed to live a life of its own. So I was content and yet silently sad that it was all coming to an end. Having lived through the beginning of the retreat and now finding myself in the middle of it, I felt like I'd been there forever and that the retreat and the writing process had lasted forever. I needed much more time to accomplish the thinking I needed to do and the papers I promised to submit. I needed time to think, hence the title of the paper. But not only this sense of being in the middle of this treasured time in terms of measured time, with this intense feeling of its beginning and soon approaching end prevailed. Something else was at stake at the same time. So in the midst of this carefully carved out time, I felt this moment at La Plaza del Sol in the area of Gracia, which I've learned to appreciate as my own personal oasis of contemplation and writing, also enmeshed with other times of previous writing, of previous retreats, and times I spent in Barcelona. It mingled up with moments of recollection of being absorbed in writing, moments of in-depth analysis by the lake in Sweden, of working in London at research retreat, seminars, moments of writing in my office in Copenhagen, in my sofa at home. It intertwined with moments of thinking out loud and writing relays in Oslo. And at the same time, as I embedded myself in a distinctly temporal experience of writing in Barcelona, the Barcelonian time weaved itself into previous writing sessions and potential writing sessions, and hence was very different from a linear time experience of being in the middle of it all. But both experiences prevailed simultaneously. The experience of the distinctly linear time and this time of being entangled in previous times. And it prevented me from knowing the one from the other. I use the metaphor interweaving, and this suggests that many threads are involved in getting a grip of what temporality might be. In addition, it suggests that it might be a tactile affair that both materializes and dematerializes. Temporality is conspicuous, yet subtle and difficult to grasp. And here I draw on the work of Braha Ettinger and Griselda Pollock's interpretation of Ettinger's artwork, when suggesting that interweaving might be an appropriate metaphor for how multiple temporalities are at stake. And I quote, "It is the opposite of flatness, for the vibrations of the colors create breathing space. Breathing/gazing, surface/depth, inside/skin. It's sensing the world's substance and its own and others' rhythms, smells, touches, movements, and gestures and sound." End of quote. Pollock succinctly indicates how interweaving involves numerous senses. So by using the metaphor interweaving, I hint at how these temporal experiences of the researcher are far from flat, in fact, quite the contrary. It's a tactile, material, and effective matter. Interweaving involves shaping key events. It's about how key issues and threads become thickened and stretched out. Interweaving suggests that these processes are non-linear and instead can be rather tumultuous, messy, and untidy. Hence, it becomes possible to understand how temporality seems to be a multisensory event. This event in Barcelona was rife with time ahead, with time now, and with time before. So by sharing this July experience with you, I invite you into the then and now of the moment of actualization in the Plaza del Sol, into the present and the past of this particular researcher experience. And it was all present in the now past tense of Barcelona and allowed me to enter into the promise to Rachel through an embodied experience with temporality as a researcher. With this personal experience of multiple temporalities, I pointed how time not alone is a unit of measurement, and this is not new. Temporality is partaking in producing realities, I'd say, and in being produced in and through material, discursive, affective, spatial practices, I would argue. I'm not embarking on an argument where I point out how subjective time might be different from objective measured time. This is rather an attempt to argue for how a concept of what I would like to call thick time could be a different way of grasping multiplicity and temporal complexity. Non-linear times, which is experienced much more in terms of thick time, with an ill-hidden reference to Goethe and his anthropological point about thick descriptions. Hence, the suggestion is that we might also think of time as interweaving of thick times and of multiple temporalities. With this personal experience, I also wish to point at how these are relevant to researcher positioning and to methodology. But the awareness of these possible concepts, the openness to the fact that more temporalities could be at stake in researcher subjectification is not innocent. It grew out of my work with youth and social media. So I'm both the researcher lamenting the vanishing research retreat and the researcher observing a trace from before and crossing over the two seemingly distant experiences, that of the youth using social media and myself placed in Barcelona. So I intend to elaborate on what emerges when I observe my own research methodology and researcher positioning, and when these observations are entangled with the research I embed myself in. To me, concepts are not representative, reflexive, or descriptive. I think of concepts as creative. In this way, I do not consider concepts to be a pre-existing theoretical framework into which we fit empirical data and we interpret them through there. Rather, I work in a manner where concepts are at work. And Deleuze argues for concepts as inventive, he says, and I quote, "Let's create extraordinary words on condition that they be put to the most ordinary use and that the entity they designate may be to exist in the same way as the most common object," end of quote. So the concepts I suggest here as productive in studies of youth, social media, and temporality have thus grown out of a meta-theoretically informed analysis of empirical data. That is, I prefer conceptual work, not purely theoretical work or empirical work lacking theory. I prefer to work at the intersection of theory and empirical analysis, and this is what I term conceptual work. Particularly, I'm preoccupied with methodologies that are capable of attending to the social and cultural world as mobile, creative, sensory, and affective, and changing and open-ended. So thinking of digitality, technologies in youth is not only a matter of understanding new phenomena in social media, but also about thinking about methodology. I talk of affective technologies, which I've been preoccupied with over the past 6 years. Affective technologies are the term I use for technologies such as smartphones and computers, which mediate expression, experiences, and communicate feelings and emotions. I have worked particularly with processes of inclusion and exclusion amongst youth in educational settings, particularly with how the processes are shaped when social media and technology become part of youth life. So I want to point out how technologies such as Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram are not neutral, but are highly effective. And they are so in many ways, in transmitting affect, in allowing affects to travel, and also in affecting the researcher. In my research on cyberbullying, I find text messages and updates circulating among school children within and beyond the classroom, specifically when they're not just reciprocal declarations of affections, like somebody stating either in a text message or a status update, "I love Holly" and "I love Kate," in mutual exchanges either in private messages on Facebook, on publicly posted messages on the walls, on text messages, on Snap. Do you know what Snapchat is? Very few people are nodding. Snapchat is an app for smartphones where you can take a picture, you can send it with a very tiny text, and the specificity to that app is that you can design for how long the receiver should see the picture, for up until 10 seconds. Meaning that you snap somebody, they receive the photo with the text, and they can, and then the picture disappears again. And the thing is that the fluent nature of this is also, it's really interesting that youth often tends to then, they get used to, they get a warning. A warning comes up on the screens with a blim, and then many teenagers accommodate their hands to make a screenshot. And then once they see the picture and it disappears, they take a screenshot, and then they can pass on the pictures that are otherwise disappearing. It's really interesting, and particularly in relation to cyberbullying. And Instagram. Yeah. So what I want to demonstrate is how the very nature of these material, temporal, discursive spaces make knowing what's going on impossible in any definite sense. Social media has, in many ways, become an integral part to most children and youth lives. So hence, social media is a player in processes of inclusion and exclusion. Take a quick look at Instagram and witness the rapid, and I mean really rapid, upload of personal pictures, and not least the rapid liking and commenting on these pictures. Or take a quick look at Facebook and the updates there from the perspectives and profiles of a 14-year-old, and you'll most probably find both rapid updates and intense affective investment. So both sharing of pictures on Instagram and incidences of cyberbullying has a very eye-catching aspect to it. In relation to cyberbullying, it would be fake Facebook accounts. That would be somebody setting up an account with your profile but telling like a different story about you. It would be hate groups, and it would be text messages such as, "You're fucking nasty, get it, you're fag," or "get out of this school," or "you're ugly," and all kinds of messages in that spectrum. So these aspects tend to catch attention by their startling and conspicuous nature, and much research is grounded on this particular conspicuousness. Yet events recognized as cyberbullying and picture sharing are made up of much more, I would argue, than this conspicuousness. Mundane and elusive practices of everyday life are important parts of cyberbullying and picture sharing too. Many of the youth I have interviewed, and this talk, I should say, is based on comprehensive empirical fieldwork over the past 6 years, which includes observations, online fieldwork, interviews, sharing of text messages, etc., and drawings. And Barbara, aged 13, describes such an experience as follows. The experience of somebody having done something wrong and not really knowing what's going on. And she says, "No one was really rude, but it was like she was just shut out. People were extreme in talking behind her back, and everybody did it. I don't think any of us really thought about it. She hadn't really done anything." End of quote. So inspired by explanations such as this, I suggest that although these feelings and sensations are vague and difficult to pin down, they still serve as a strong, effective guidelines for what's possible and what's not possible. And they are effectively loaded sensations of not really having done anything, a sudden taste of being uneasy, and a sense that something happened too quickly and in unforeseen ways. And I argue that we need to address the particularity of the affective intensity embedded in hasty exchanges of pictures, hashtags, and the attached comments. Hence my interest in what I call affective technologies and temporality. I'll now share with you a small case to give you a better taste of what's going on when children aged 12 to 14, 15 share these pictures and share these updates. Sarah is also aged 13, experiences fear of what she might read when she logs onto Facebook. She's especially scared of Ellen, whose evaluations about what happened earlier this day is uploaded on Facebook. Will she acknowledge Sarah's attempt to be part of the group or not? Yesterday it was Victoria who was scared, but today she's full of trust, feeling secure and included with Ellen and Anna, and looking forward to the plans they have this afternoon. For a short time, Victoria's sense of powerlessness in life is replaced by the satisfaction of being included. But Caitlin has become irritated and angry as Laura and Anna grow more sure of Victoria's preference for them. And this is not meant for you to remember the names or to make sense of the names in the sense that what picture should I get? The picture that I want to transmit to you is the fact that it moves around, and it moves around that rapidly. So this summary of an everyday experience of youth life and within and with social media is at the intersection of what I have referred to as both the conspicuous and the mundane. The girls are not engaged with the same affects at the same time. They're angry, happy, miserable, disturbed, and elated at different points of time that are displaced in relation to one another. It's important here to point out that displacement does not imply that the girls feel precisely the same, but rather that their affective movements in relation to each other are meaningful in the way that they manifest reciprocal responses and reactions. So the exchange of status updates on Facebook and Instagram, love you, hate bitch fight today, or you're too ugly to be living with us which would be examples of status updates, is interrupted and continue, and it's uncertain who has read what. At the same time, these comments are accessible to an infinite audience. They're uploaded on Facebook, meaning that basically anybody can access them and see them. The exchanges of precisions and affects takes place more rapidly than can be reproduced in the freezing of relations that I've just tried to present to you. It seems that no precision can be guaranteed stability and permanence. So when Ellen logs on to check Sarah's interpretation of what happened during the break today, because that's what they do, they evaluate what happened during the break today, and they do that on Facebook. So when she logs on to see what Sarah thought of what happened earlier today, and then the next day, Sarah can't be sure that Ellen has actually read her status update or whether she has been on Facebook at all. There's a revelation of non-simultaneity in affective investment. Ellen's reaction to Sarah's mood evaluation might be mediated by her father reading the message and telling her his interpretation of it, which will not be obvious to the ones reading it. So this mediation might lead Ellen to think and react differently in a way that Sarah cannot understand. Sarah might not be completely sure whether Simon has read the same comments, and thus whether his strange behavior in physics today had anything to do with her status update. All these uncertainties are not meant to be a caricature of an incomprehensible youth life. Rather, they present a picture of the tumult that young people tell us leads them to their smartphones, the hands reaching for the technology and logging on before they are fully aware of it. So what I'm offering here is a way to understand this messiness and this tumult in terms of non-simultaneity in intensity. So the presence of social networking sites with their status updates and mood evaluations as a movement in youth's reciprocal relations also make it one of the locations from which affects are circulated. Affects do not merely circulate between subjects, but also between subjects and technologies, I'd argue. The point is that when social networking sites are involved, the non-simultaneity and the intensity of affects become particularly visible. Bodies partake in and are commented on in the status updates, which has moved on to be actualized in new places, like, for instance, the screenshot of the Snapchat picture posted on Twitter. They're being commented upon, they're whispered about, and they're scrutinized at different times by both tangible and intangible bodies, because they might not be certain that the name on the display is also the body, the fingers does not necessarily, who has tapped that message, does not necessarily belong to the name which is displayed. So a status update displays rhizomatic movements that cannot be reduced to any one body or any one point. So when social networking sites are involved, affect seems to be pushed back and forth in barely recognizable relations whose content, order, and ownership are displaced. It almost seems as if mood is cut off from the students' relational practices, only to be reinstalled as mood in cyberspace and to overexpose the affects that are now activated and set in motion. In Sarah Ahmed's word, and I quote, "Emotions work to shape the surfaces of individuals and collective bodies. Bodies take the shape of the very contact they've had with objects and other." So I'm adding this one to it. If we suppose that a person does not exist merely in one present moment, as a now, then we might also claim that the no longer and the not yet of the significance of the status update are simultaneously embedded in the moment and being displaced. So in this actual moment, one Tuesday morning, for instance, Sarah is no longer filled with yesterday's anger, and Ellen is not yet worried about the anger that Sarah expressed yesterday. Ellen doesn't read about it until later this night, when it's no longer evening and Sarah's anger no longer exists. So thick time and multiple temporalities are at play here too, and the experiences cannot be neatly divided into linear time. The affected tenor cannot be captured in the shape of uniform and homogeneous stability, but rather in push and pulls of intensities. The importance of a particular fake profile, a particular status update, or a particular text message is vibrating in the tension between multiple temporalities and multiple performative interpretations. Hence, I'm arguing that the coexistence of the spectacular, the conspicuous, and the unnoticed and intangible characterize technologically mediated relations and subjectifications. The way in which they are entangled are in rhythms which gather as a sensory and affective resonance and holds events and subjects in a temporary destructive pattern of exclusions, that is if we talk about cyberbullying. So it all seems to be a very dense affective affair. As this very dense summary that I've just given indicates, non-simultaneity can occur in many situations where connections and interactions actually function. And I propose to refer to this lack of accord as non-simultaneity, as I mentioned, instead of using terms like asynchrony, in order to indicate how different temporalities play a significant role in how technologies are entangled in and with youth. But I also intend to show how temporalities interact with other forces, such as spatiality, values, technologies, and affects. The point is that it is impossible to know in advance which values, affects, etc. might be in action. It's only possible to say that elements other than temporality can be out of joint. Time, and especially displaced time, is a central concept, but temporal displacement must always be, in this case, understood in connection with displacements in position, technological admission, affects, and the many other forces at work. In dwelling at non-simultaneity, thick time, and multiple temporalities as possible concepts in both analysis of youth and social media and research methodologies, I take off from a delusion perspective which assumes that concepts need to be worked with, not applied. I entitled this talk, Time to Think. And this is perhaps most of all a political statement with an exclamation mark, to say that research does take time, and that I'm not in the mood to hasten research processes. And it's also to say that I have a suspicion that new contours of subjectification are in play when social media and technologies mingle into the lives of youth and children. So when we witness subjective movements in and through social media and technologically mediated movements, it might be an idea to experiment with new concepts and new methodologies. So I ask, do the well-known categories alter meaning when they're being actualized in such an intense figure of movement as the life of youth and social media? And perhaps it is time to seriously consider whether and how social media and technologies not only alter the lives of youth and children, but also challenge us as researchers in ways we're not hitherto taken really in. In this manner, this question of time to think is not least a way of raising a methodological issue and saying, perhaps we're running behind. And it is my impression that the categories available to us are perhaps too old, we could say. And my impression is that social media contains an intensification of the question of subjectification, and that this might be a favorable place to concentrate our efforts in refining concepts and research methodologies.